Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. No cell signal, no traffic, just a quiet lake, his lake. Until one weekend, strangers appeared, kids screamed, and a bounce house rose on land they didn't own. What began as a peaceful retreat turned into a war of maps, lies, and revenge. And he wasn't about to back down. I'd almost forgotten how quiet it could be out here. No cell towers, no distant highway hum, just the wind slicing through pines and the soft lap of water against muddy banks. I pulled my truck to the end of a rutted gravel road, engine ticking as it cooled, and stepped out into the sharp, high-altitude air. The scent of juniper, fresh moss, and something old, untouched, hit me like a memory. It had been years since I'd come this far out on the property. Life got in the way. Clients, contracts, Denver traffic, and eventually the slow decay of my patience for the corporate world. But I was done with that now. 57 years old, retired hydrologist, and proud owner of 3,000 wild, unruly, magnificent acres in southwest Colorado, including this, my lake. Technically, it wasn't even supposed to be a lake anymore. When I bought the ranch almost 15 years ago, the water rights came with it. An old glacial depression, historically a cattle reservoir, long neglected but still on paper as a private, non-navigable body of water. I'd filed the paperwork myself, had it notarized, mapped, recorded, and buried it in 2 different fireproof lockboxes. I knew every inch of this land better than I knew most people. I threw the tailgate down and started unloading gear, canvas tent, collapsible chair, portable fire pit, fishing rods, a crate of whiskey and dry goods, and a rusted steel sign I had made back in the city. No trespassing, private ranch access only. Just a little reminder, this weekend wasn't about confrontation, but I didn't feel like surprises either. By dusk, the camp was set. My tent faced the lake, fire pit crackling, trout sizzling in the pan. I sat in my chair, boots up on a log, watching the last light catch on the surface like it always did, amber gold and still. It would have been perfect if it weren't for the echo of kids screaming across the water. I blinked. Kids. I stood, squinting across the lake's northern edge. There they were, maybe 4 or 5 children running down a wooden dock, launching themselves into the water with gleeful shrieks. Paddleboards leaned against a shack. A kayak bobbed nearby. Someone had even mounted a tire swing to a bent old cottonwood. And then I saw the sign, mounted to a wooden post. Bold serif font. Bright white letters on green background. Private HOA access only. Willow Cove Estates. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I dug into my backpack, pulled out my laminated property map, and walked over to the nearest boulder. I spread the map out across the rock and pulled up my GPS app. Coordinates matched. Survey lines matched. That shoreline, their shoreline, was still part of my lot. Always had been. I traced it again. No mistake. They had built an entire recreational setup, docks, swings, boat storage, on my land. Not 1 foot over the line. 20, 30, 40 yards in. I took a breath and sat back down. Fire still crackling. Trout now a little overcooked but edible. I chewed in silence, watching the kids jump, splash, laugh. They weren't the problem. Yet. I wasn't going to storm over there waving a shotgun or throwing lawsuits around. Not yet. I had no desire to get into a pissing match with some HOA that probably thought the E in estates gave them sovereignty over the goddamn wilderness. But I knew this wasn't going away on its own, so I made a plan. The next morning before sunrise, I hammered the steel sign into the soft ground just behind the shore. Then I hoisted the old flag of the ranch, a navy blue banner with a stylized double elk emblem I'd designed in college, and ran it up the pole I'd lashed to a nearby pine. By the time the sun touched the lake, I was sitting in my chair again, coffee in hand, boots crossed at the ankle, watching, waiting, and smiling. Just a little. I wasn't expecting them to show up with jackets. It was mid-morning, the sun warming the eastern slope, and I just reeled in a fat rainbow trout when I saw them. 3 figures striding down from the north side of the lake like mall cops on a mission. 2 men, 1 woman. All wearing matching navy windbreakers with bold white lettering on the back. Willow Cove Ho Patrol. Patrol, Jesus Christ. The lead guy, mid-40s, stocky build, wrap-around sunglasses, looked like he took his job very seriously. Behind him, a younger man clutched a clipboard like it was a badge. The woman, blonde, pulled-back ponytail, resting scowl, held her phone up like she was already filming some kind of evidence. They stopped at the edge of the tree line, just far enough not to cross the invisible line of my fire pit. "Excuse me, sir," Sunglasses said, with all the charm of a DMV rejection letter. "You can't camp here. This area is designated common property for Willow Cove Estates. You're on private HOA maintained grounds." I tossed the trout into my cooler and stood slowly, dusting off my hands. "I am on private property," I said. "But it's mine." "You'll need to pack up and move," the clipboard guy added. "No overnight use without HOA approval." "I'm not part of your HOA," I said flatly. They exchanged a look. The woman began muttering into her phone. I caught a few choice words. Non-compliant, belligerent male, possibly unstable. Sunglasses stepped forward, chest puffed. "We've had complaints. Residents saw you erecting a tent, building a fire. There are rules here, safety rules. You're in violation. I don't answer to your rules," I said calmly. I walked over to my duffel bag, pulled out my folder, and handed over a laminated map. "This is parcel 47B. That shoreline over there, also mine. You can cross-reference with county land records if you like." He barely looked at it. "We'll call the sheriff," he said. I smiled. "Please do." They huddled like middle schoolers planning a prank, then walked up the hill, muttering into their radios. 15 minutes later, I heard the distant hum of tires on gravel. The sheriff's deputy arrived in a dark green SUV, stepping out with a mix of professionalism and the exhausted patience of a man who'd been dealing with HOA drama since breakfast. Before he could say a word, the clipboard guy launched into it. "Officer, thank God you're here. This man is illegally camping on protected HOA lands. We've had children playing here all week. He refuses to leave. He's hostile. He could be dangerous." The deputy raised an eyebrow. "Is he armed?" "I have a fishing knife and a camp axe," I called out helpfully, "and a propane stove. Might be a violation of your omelet bylaws that earned me a half smirk from the cop." Then came her voice, a shrill, controlled command from behind the trees. "Stand back. I'll handle this." She emerged like a storm cloud in a pantsuit. Karen R. Randall, president of Willow Cove Estates HOA. According to the gold-embossed name badge she'd bothered to wear, blonde helmet hair, designer boots, and an air of someone who'd gotten high off her own bylaws. She walked straight toward me like she was approaching an escaped prisoner. "You," she said, jabbing a manicured finger toward my chest, "are trespassing on restricted family-designated community lakefront. I don't care what lies you told those volunteers. This property belongs to the HOA and its dues-paying members. I can show you county land records right now," I replied, handing her the same folder. She snatched it, gave it the kind of glance most people reserve for restaurant menus they already hate, and tossed it back like I'd just tried to hand her a dead bird. "This is fraudulent," she snapped. "You're trying to occupy public land and disguise it as private." The deputy finally stepped in, raising his hand. "Ma'am, let's keep this civil. Mr. Drayden, you say you own this parcel." I opened my backpack and pulled out the full deed packet, GPS overlay maps, water rights certificate, and the notarized boundary survey filed in the county office. Everything was dated, stamped, official. He flipped through them in silence, took out his phone, walked off a few steps, and made a call to dispatch. Cross-referenced my parcel number. After a minute, he returned and looked at Karen. "Ma'am, this land's not listed under Willow Cove. It's registered under Mr. Drayden's name, bought and recorded nearly 15 years ago. Full rights, including lake access." Karen's face twitched just a little, then she tried to recover. That has to be outdated. We have maps from our development phase that clearly show this shore as part of our recreational easement. "Do you have those maps?" the deputy asked. "They're digital," she said, clearly stalling. "Then bring them to the sheriff's office. Until then, you can't enforce HOA rules on private property." She stood frozen, the patrol behind her deflated like popped floats at a children's pool. I gave her a little nod. "Would you like a fish sandwich?" "They're fresh," the deputy chuckled. Karen turned on her heel and stormed off, barking orders into her phone. I went back to my fire, poured myself some coffee, and added a little bourbon from the flask in my coat pocket. It was going to be a long weekend. But suddenly, I wasn't so tired anymore. 3 days later, I got a letter from the county. Not a regular envelope either. This one was thick, certified, with a red Urgent Response Requested stamp on the front. For a moment, I thought maybe someone had found human remains on my land, or that the state wanted to build a pipeline through my lake. Because, why not? That would be the next logical step after suburban mall cops. I slid it open with my buck knife and unfolded a stack of documents, the top of which read, Notice of Violation, Unlawful Land Use, Environmental Protection Zone 3, Years A. My eyebrows rose so high, they almost met my hairline. According to the letter, I was being reported for unauthorized land alteration, illegally removing protected vegetation, constructing a temporary structure without permit, endangering a Class C recreational waterway. The cherry on top, the complaint was filed by Willow Cove Estates HOA, citing community concern for environmental damage and recreational interference. They attached a map, a new one I'd never seen before. According to this lovely piece of fantasy, the southern shore of the lake, my camp, had been reclassified as part of a protected recreational buffer zone under oversight of the HOA and tied to a conservation corridor project that conveniently had no official record in county zoning systems. But this map had the HOA seal, a signature that looks suspiciously like Karen's, and a whole new set of parcel boundaries. I sat at my camp table, staring at it like it was some kind of joke from a bureaucratic Twilight Zone. But this wasn't a joke. This was a move. Karen had gone from HOA busybody to full-on cartographic fiction writer, trying to redraw the goddamn earth. I packed up my papers, drove 2 hours into Durango, and walked straight into the county land office with my own deed, the new HOA map, and a look on my face that said, I'm too old for this shit, but I will burn your entire digital archive to the ground if needed. The clerk, a woman named Delia, who looked like she'd been sorting property disputes since the Reagan administration, scanned everything into their system and made a call upstairs. 30 minutes later, I was in a conference room with 2 municipal zoning analysts and a regional rep from the Department of Natural Resources. I laid everything out: original survey, deed, GPS overlays, historic topo maps, even a drone photo I'd taken last year when I flew over the ranch scouting beaver activity. Every single piece matched my claim. Southern shore, lake, pasture, all legally mine. They examined the HOA's submission. One of the analysts, a bearded guy named Ron, frowned. This map's layer formatting doesn't match our zoning data, he said, pointing at the legend. Looks like it was exported from a third-party CAD program. Also, there's no record of this conservation zone designation. Because it doesn't exist, I said. They made it up. The DNR guy leaned forward. We take these kinds of misrepresentations very seriously. If they submitted this to influence zoning policy, that's potentially criminal. Delia made a low whistle. I've seen this trick before. Developers try it sometimes. But a homeowners association? Ron laughed. Bold move. I left them copies of everything and headed home, stomach still twisting with disbelief. Karen wasn't just bluffing. She was fabricating government documents and feeding them into official channels, hoping no one would notice until I was removed by bulldozer. That night, I sat by the fire and cracked open the cheap scotch I keep for moments of existential irritation. Across the lake, I saw her porch lights flicker through the trees. I wondered if she was celebrating. Too early, Karen. Way too early. I woke up to the sound of hammering. Not woodpecker hammering. Not distant cabin construction hammering. I mean full-blown event setup hammering. Metal on metal, truck doors slamming, generators humming. I stepped out of the tent barefoot, half blinded by the morning sun, and found myself staring at a goddamn bounce house. No, really, a bounce house. Bright blue and yellow, inflated and squealing in the wind, set up just across the water, on my land. There were folding chairs, orange cones, a white tent with the Willow Cove logo, and a banner that read, Willow Lake Days, a community tradition. I just stood there. A couple of HOA volunteers in matching polo shirts waved cheerfully across the lake like I was part of the planning committee. They'd outdone themselves. Food trucks arrived by noon. A stage was being built on the gravel bar near the old pasture line, where my grandfather used to let horses drink. They had kids painting signs, someone setting up a speaker system, and a woman in yoga pants directing traffic like she was running Coachella. And all of it, every square inch, was on my side of the property line. Karen didn't just redraw a map. She brought the circus. I documented everything. Drone footage, wide-angle lens shots, GPS coordinates embedded in every single frame. I walked the property line with a high-visibility survey flag and marked the original posts, still standing. They had no permits, no right of access documentation, nothing on file with the county. Just entitlement and lawn chairs. The cherry on top? I overheard one of the volunteers say. Isn't it great the HOA was able to reclaim this land? I heard they got it designated for recreation, again, reclaim. I had to sit down to keep from laughing myself into cardiac arrest. The festival kicked off that afternoon. Music, corn dogs, yoga on paddleboards. Karen gave a speech from the stage about community togetherness and stewardship of shared natural resources. I watched it all from a hill just above camp, sipping coffee like I was a sniper with binoculars. No one approached me, not yet. But the real kicker came when I visited the county records office again the following week to request copies of all submissions made by the HOA over the past 5 years. I'd made enough noise now that the deputy clerk handed me the entire folder without batting an eye. Inside, HOA board minutes from 3 years ago, showing intent to expand community recreation onto undeveloped bordering land. An email thread between Karen and a private contractor discussing minimal risk shoreline development. And a scanned copy of an old half-faded survey with a handwritten line drawn across the southern shore. Not legally valid, but damn if it didn't look official to the untrained eye. They knew. They'd known for years. Willow Cove HOA had been using my land, building on it, improving it with other people's money, and collecting dues to maintain something they didn't own. Hell, Karen had budgeted $18,000 a year under lakefront maintenance. And I'll bet most of that went to the bastards who set up the paddleboard shack. Later that day, I met a guy outside the courthouse. A wiry man in his late 60s leaning against a dusty F-150. Said his name was Malcolm. Said he used to be on the HOA board until he got voted out for asking the wrong damn questions. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "You know, I told him 3 years ago that land wasn't ours." Karen said, "Let it be my problem." I said, "It's going to be everyone's problem." Guess I was right. He handed me a USB stick and walked off. Inside were scans of emails, old maps, internal memos with notes like, "Do not mention ownership if questioned," and a budget spreadsheet with a line item labeled "Outbound Legal Quiet Title." I forwarded the whole thing to the Department of Natural Resources and made an anonymous drop to the local news. Because I was done being nice, and because Karen had no idea just how many damn skeletons she'd buried in my yard. I've dealt with bureaucrats, regulators, and government paper pushers most of my life. I know how slow the machine moves. But I also know that sometimes all it takes to bring it to life is the right little push in the right rotten place. So I made the push. After the whole festival debacle, I started digging, not into maps or soil samples this time, but into the HOA's money. Because if Karen was willing to fake maps and stage events on my land, I figured there was a good chance she wasn't exactly keeping her accounting tight either. I called in a favor from an old friend named Joel, CPA, chain smoker, and ruthless when it came to numbers. We'd worked together years ago tracking illegal water usage permits in mining towns. Joel had a knack for sniffing out financial bullshit the way bloodhounds sniff out bodies. I handed him a few HOA public disclosures, budget notes from the Malcolm Drive, and Karen's glossy annual reports from the community website. 3 days later, he called me and said, "Your girl's laundering money with the grace of a rodeo clown." I love her. Turns out, Willow Cove Estates HOA had been reporting expenditures on projects that didn't exist, maintenance costs that were laughably inflated, and legal consulting fees that mysteriously lined up with Karen's sister-in-law's LLC in Utah. They'd spent over $18,000 per year for lakefront infrastructure maintenance for a lake they didn't own, landscaping contracts with no addresses, consultant payments with no corresponding services, board-approved bonuses for conflict mitigation, whatever the hell that means. Joel helped me file an anonymous complaint with the Internal Revenue Service, the Colorado Department of Local Affairs, and, just for good measure, the state HOA Oversight Board, which had a backlog of homeowner complaints stretching from Durango to the Wyoming line. It didn't take long. 2 weeks after that, the HOA received a formal audit notice, and it hit like a bomb. I wasn't there when it was delivered, but according to Malcolm, who by now was practically feeding me HOA dirt through a fire hose, Karen had a full-on meltdown in front of the mail kiosk, tore open the envelope, cursed out loud, and then stormed into the community center yelling for an emergency executive session. Meanwhile, residents started whispering. They were used to Karen being overbearing, controlling, a bit power-hungry. But embezzlement, misuse of dues, fake contracts, that was new, that was scary. I heard from another source, a lady named Tamra who ran the HOA newsletter, that a few board members had already begun distancing themselves. One even resigned publicly, citing ethical concerns. They couldn't afford to go down with the ship. It was a beautiful kind of implosion, not loud, not fiery, just steady collapse under the weight of its own bullshit. Still, Karen wouldn't quit. She issued a letter to the residents claiming the audit was politically motivated, that rogue individuals were working to undermine community cohesion, and that false actors with personal vendettas were spreading disinformation about the HOA's integrity. I framed the letter and hung it in my outhouse. It fit the decor. But the real win, I finally got a call back from the local NBC affiliate in Grand Junction. They'd received my anonymous package and wanted to verify the story. Property dispute, HOA corruption, fake zoning, embezzlement, the works. They sent a young reporter named Jasmine down with a camera crew. I gave her a tour of the shoreline, showed her the signs, the drone footage, the fake maps, the bounce house debris that was still half buried near the gravel bar. She asked if I wanted to go on camera. No, I said. I just want the truth to be louder than her bullhorn. Jasmine smiled. Don't worry. We'll crank the volume. That night, I watched the broadcast from inside my tent, huddled in a sleeping bag with my dog, Buck. There it was. My lake, my story, my stolen shore, on TV. Karen's name blurred out for legal reasons, but everyone in Willow Cove would know damn well who they were talking about. By morning, I'd gotten 5 voicemails. One was from a local lawyer offering to represent me pro bono. The last was from Karen. I didn't listen to it. I just smiled and deleted it. The courtroom smelled like burnt coffee and anxious perfume. It wasn't big, just a modest district courtroom in Montezuma County. Pale wood paneling, a flag in the corner that looked like it had seen better wars. I'd been here before, years ago, as a state hydrologist giving testimony on a water rights appeal. Back then, I wore a tie. This time, I wore denim, a clean button-down, and boots polished just enough to show respect, not submission. Karen sat across the aisle, flanked by 2 attorneys who looked like they'd both been scrounged up from a mall law firm and paid in HOA dues and Chardonnay. She didn't look at me, just stared straight ahead, hands clasped, lips tight, hair styled like she was still trying to win Miss Community Enforcement at 2005. The courtroom was packed. Not just with board members and nosy residents, but reporters, curious locals, even a few ranchers I recognized from back east. This thing had become regional theater, and the main act was about to begin. The case was civil, at first. I'd filed for damages for trespass, for unauthorized use and alteration of private land, and for emotional distress just to round it off. The judge, a stern woman with glacier eyes, made it clear from the jump. Facts only, no HOA drama, no grandstanding. Good thing I brought facts. We submitted official parcel records going back 15 years. GPS tagged drone footage of every inch of HOA encroachment. HOA budgets showing annual maintenance expenditures on my land. Testimonies from former board member Malcolm, the clerk from the zoning office, and even Joel, my CPA friend with the chain-smoking voice of God. Then came the crown jewel, an internal HOA memo dated 2 years back, signed by Karen referencing strategic expansion of HOA influence over adjacent zones to bolster property values. She might as well have written, "Dear Judge, here's proof of my scam." Love, Karen. Their lawyers tried the usual. Community misunderstanding, confusing historical maps, assumed public access. But it all crumbled when Malcolm took the stand and read aloud an email he'd received from Karen after raising concerns. In a board meeting, let sleeping dogs lie, Malcolm. We've already installed the dock. They'd have to sue us to prove anything. Then came the kicker. One of the board members who'd previously sided with Karen, Angela, head of HOA landscaping, flipped. She requested to testify. The judge allowed it. Angela walked up, pale as paper, and said clearly, "We were told the land belonged to us." But when I asked to see a copy of the original purchase documents, Karen said we didn't need them because, quote, "perception is ownership." I should have known then. You could feel the shift in the room. The atmosphere went from quiet tension to collective disgust. Karen still didn't look at me, but her knuckles were white on the bench. The judge recessed for review. During the break, I walked out front to clear my head. One of the younger residents from Willow Cove, kid couldn't have been older than 25, approached me nervously. Said his parents had voted to approve the lake expansion fee Karen pushed 3 years ago. Said they had no idea it was all fake. He looked like someone had just told him Santa Claus was a con man with a felony record. Back in court, the judge returned with her decision on the civil claims. Full affirmation of property ownership in my name. Declaration that all HOA improvements, structures, and usage of my land were unauthorized. An order for complete removal of all physical installations within 60 days. And a financial judgment of $380,000 in damages, fines, and penalties. The courtroom went silent. Karen blinked like someone had slapped her with a frozen trout. Her lawyer leaned in and whispered something, and she finally turned to look at me. There was no rage in her eyes, just pure disbelief. Like the story she wrote in her head didn't end the way she planned. But this wasn't the end. Not quite. Because right after court adjourned, 2 men in suits from the district attorney's office approached the bench and quietly passed a folder to the judge. Inside, a criminal referral. Turns out, the state didn't appreciate the fake zoning map Karen submitted to the Department of Natural Resources, especially not once they found out she'd forged a staffer's digital signature. And suddenly, Karen wasn't just a liar. She was a felon in progress. I thought the civil trial would be the end of it. It wasn't. 2 weeks after the judgment, I got a call from a detective in the district attorney's office. He wanted to schedule a formal interview. Not about land ownership, about fraud, forgery, and false documentation submitted to a state agency. Apparently, when Karen submitted that phony zoning map to the Department of Natural Resources, the one with the fake buffer zone and the conservation overlay, she'd used a real DNR staffer's name and even faked a digital signature by cutting and pasting from a public environmental report. That's not a zoning dispute. That's a felony. I gave my statement. So did Malcolm. So did the GIS analyst who originally caught the map formatting inconsistencies. By the time the case made it to a grand jury, the pile of evidence could have choked a landfill, and for once, things moved fast. Karen R. Randall, president of the Willow Cove Estates HOA, was arrested in her own driveway during what neighbors would later describe as a very intense confrontation with multiple shouting dogs. She was charged with forgery of a government document, submission of false materials to a public agency, fraudulent misuse of organizational funds, criminal trespass, and wire fraud, thanks to HOA dues being funneled through her sister-in-law's fake consulting firm across state lines. The mugshot was glorious. No blowout, no pearls, just rage, wrinkles, and a badly smeared mascara line that looked like a regret river. Meanwhile, back at Willow Cove, full-on collapse. The audit report Joel helped trigger was released to the residents. It revealed everything: misappropriated funds, ghost vendors, fake invoices, personal purchases labeled as HOA strategic expenses, including a spa membership Karen charged under recreational planning wellness. The board was gutted. 3 members resigned. 1 lawyered up immediately. A temporary state administrator was appointed to oversee all HOA decisions. And the residents, they were stunned, furious, betrayed. Some of them tried to apologize to me, to say they had no idea. And maybe they didn't. But it's hard to ignore a bounce house set up on someone else's ranch and still believe you're the victim. HOA fees were frozen. The board bank accounts were locked pending legal review. And perhaps most satisfying of all, the court ordered the demolition of every single unauthorized structure on my shoreline. Piers, docks, kayak sheds, picnic areas. All gone. On their dime. I watched it happen over the course of several weeks. Heavy machinery, contractors sweating bullets, little kids crying as the swings came down. One morning, I saw a family trying to take goodbye pictures next to a sign that read, "Lake access closed, private property." They didn't smile much. Karen's trial went fast. She pled no contest after her attorney saw the email trail and nearly quit on the spot. She didn't get the max, but she got close enough. 9 years in state prison with parole possible after 5. Plus restitution, asset forfeiture, and a permanent mark on her record that made future HOA employment unlikely. At sentencing, she gave a short statement. "I thought the lake was part of our neighborhood. It always felt like it belonged to all of us. She never once said my name. It took nearly 3 months before the shoreline looked like it used to. Once the docks were gone and the paddleboard racks and sun-bleached benches and rusted grills were all hauled off in the backs of contractor pickups, the lake started to feel like mine again. Not just on paper, not just in a legal folder, but in the bones. I spent most mornings sitting in the same spot where I'd first pitched my tent, coffee in hand, dog by my feet, boots damp with dew. The silence had changed. It wasn't defensive anymore. It wasn't waiting for the next intrusion. It was whole. I replaced the old "No Trespassing" sign with a new one. This one was metal, professionally engraved. It said, "Private property. This lake is not for HOA use. Ask Karen why." The first time I saw a couple from Willow Cove walk by and stop dead at the sign, I almost laughed. They didn't touch anything, just stood there for a while and left. Eventually, people stopped coming altogether. The trail that used to cut across the southern ridge, where families would drag wagons full of floaties and beach towels, is overgrown now. No more foot traffic, no more pop-up picnics on land they didn't own. Just trees, rocks, the wind, and the slow return of birds that didn't like paddleboards. The HOA is still under state review. New elections are scheduled, but most residents don't want the job. Too much heat, too many burned bridges. I heard someone tried to start a GoFundMe to save Willow Cove's lake access. It didn't raise much. Turns out, it's hard to raise money when you've already spent years spending someone else's. I've had a few offers to sell the ranch. Developers, retreat companies, even a startup that wanted to build a glamping destination that preserves rustic authenticity. I told them all the same thing: go glamp somewhere else. I didn't fight this hard to watch it turn into a brochure. Malcolm still drops by sometimes. We fish, talk. He's got that same worn wisdom of a man who knew the truth early and watched no one listen. This place always deserved better than HOA politics, he told me last week. I nodded. So did the people living under it. Karen's still locked up. Word is she tried to file an appeal but was denied. I doubt she'll last the full 9 years, but honestly, it doesn't matter anymore. She's gone. The system she built? Gone too. And me? I'm still here. No titles, no power plays, no legalese. Just me, a couple fishing rods, a stack of firewood, and a lake that finally knows peace. One morning, I found a kid's old flip-flop buried in the mud near the shore. Faded, too small, probably there since the bounce house days. I left it on a stump at the water's edge, let it rot into the landscape, like everything else they left behind.